What does it mean for the U.S. to launch another large-scale strike against Iran? Does this mean the U.S. is going to restart a large-scale war with Iran? That's our first topic. The second topic is about Trump speaking in Ankara, Turkey. His remarks were truly blunt and straightforward, probably leaving EU leaders breathless and the whole world stunned. What exactly did Trump say? In addition, Trump also met with Zelensky in Turkey. The future direction of the Russia-Ukraine war is also something that deserves close attention. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fangway. Also, hello to our friends watching on YouTube and to the listeners of Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Now, let's get straight to the point. On the night of July 6th to the 7th, Iran attacked 3 commercial ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. All these ships were traveling along the southern coast of the Strait of Hormuz, taking the route through the Gulf of Oman. But Iran used the excuse that these ships were not taking the Iranian route to attack them, using 2 drones and a missile. So what happened next? The U.S. military just launched a large-scale bombing campaign against Iran that lasted 4 hours, mainly targeting Iran's maritime harassment capabilities and its air defense systems. The strikes hit air defense systems and radar stations, among other targets. More than 80 targets were hit, including Revolutionary Guard vessels used to threaten shipping, and over 60 so-called small boats of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard inside and outside the strait were destroyed. This is what we've previously referred to as their Mosquito Fleet. In addition, they also bombed Karg Island, an important oil export hub. Basically, this strike, from Trump's perspective, is what he calls an asymmetric response. If you hit me once, I don't just hit you back once. I hit you 20 times. So essentially, they struck 80 targets and destroyed 60 boats. The ratio of this counterattack, you see, is 3 boats to 80 targets, which is more than 20 times greater. So Trump really did say in the media that we hit them back 20 times harder. At the same time, the Trump administration reinstated sanctions on Iran's oil exports. The Treasury Department has already revoked the license it had just granted to Iran, which allowed them to sell their oil and related products. So White House officials made it clear that what we signed with Iran is called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, and it's performance-based. That means we give benefits based on their performance, and if they don't perform well, we take them back. Since Iran continues to attack oil tankers from various countries, we decided to reinstate the sanctions and revoke that license. So what did Iran do? Iran responded by targeting U.S. military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait. Iran claimed to have struck 85 targets, which means if you hit me 80 times, I'll hit you 85 times. Of course, how credible is what the U.S. military says? I think it's pretty credible. But how credible is what Iran says? Not very credible, in my opinion. That's just my commentary. But regardless, this incident caused oil prices to surge again on a large scale. So when I checked this morning, both Brent crude and West Texas crude prices had jumped by 5%. Let me check what the latest situation is now. So the latest update is that they've jumped by, hold on. Oh, wow, it's up to 7% now? All right, so Brent crude has jumped 8%, okay, and West Texas crude has jumped 7.5%. So that's really quite something. So that's the current situation. President Trump said, "We hit them hard last night." Really hard. I want to give them a warning. Tonight, we're going to hit them even harder. They are the Cocoa. Cocoa? What does Cocoa mean? Cocoa is like a cuckoo bird. In American slang, if you call someone Cocoa, it means they're crazy, like their brain isn't right, because the cuckoo bird keeps going cuckoo, cuckoo, nonstop. It sounds it just means someone is not right in the head. That's what they're saying. Once we finish negotiating and hold a press conference, Iran will say we never talked. He said they've been Middle East bullies for 47 years, but not anymore. A reporter asked about the ceasefire. Trump said, "The ceasefire is already over." The reporter asked, "Will you continue negotiations?" Trump said, "If you want to talk, we can still talk. I'll allow negotiations to go on, but I think it's a waste of time. They're a bunch of liars." He was talking about Iran. He said, "All my life I've been making deals, dealing with people like this." He said, "These people come from another school. They're different. They're liars. They're sick people." He spoke very harshly. Trump said, "Frankly, I don't want to waste my time dealing with them. I don't like them." I don't like these people. For Americans, for Trump to say something like, "I don't like him," that's a really strong statement. The most accurate translation is that he is extremely disgusted by them. That's why he would say, "I don't like him." I don't like him. All right, then Trump specifically pointed out, are they going to hold a funeral for Khamenei? Oh, they asked for a whole week, asking us if we could give them a week. So I said, fine, we'll give you that, because they needed it for security reasons. When they were holding the funeral, they could have been wiped out. So Trump said, I agreed to it, but after giving them a week, they turned around and attacked us. There are these kinds of lunatics, huh? And at the same time, a propaganda channel related to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard called News publicly shared President Trump's exact location in Ankara, the capital of Turkey. Staying on the 23rd floor of the JW Marriott Hotel in Ankara. What that means is that Iran now has Trump within striking range, huh? We should launch a ballistic missile and take Trump out directly. Trump just said directly that they want to eliminate the American leader, which is me. He said, I'm on every one of their lists. So far, I think I've been a bit lucky, but I'm afraid that luck might not last much longer. Trump speaks very frankly. You know, he doesn't hold back. He just says what's on his mind. Yeah, that's right. It's pretty interesting. Listening to Trump is entertaining. He's unlike diplomats who play it safe. But if you really listen, his reasoning makes sense. He's not bluffing or talking nonsense. What he says is the truth, even if his delivery is rough. It's rough logic, but it works. Trump said we could take out all of Iran's bridges in a single day, meaning we could cripple their entire transportation network overnight. He suggested taking out their power and desalination plants, noting he'd rather not attack, but could destroy those vital water facilities. He then mentioned Card Island, saying he told them to hit only defensive structures, not pipelines, in case we need to retake the island ourselves. Take it back. All right, and in addition, the U.S. government is reportedly working on a plan to, within the next few days, carry out joint operations with Israel, this is a rumor going around, to eliminate several Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders, including the Houthi. They believe that many of the recent actions have been orchestrated by the IRGC. They are a major obstacle to any peace agreement. Of course, if you ask me, I think, well, the whole regime is an obstacle. Let me share my perspective. This is my commentary here. I think the entire peace process and negotiation process with Iran is basically a learning process for Trump. He's only ever dealt with Manhattan hustlers and shady businessmen and has never encountered such evil regimes as Iran and the Chinese Communist Party. So he had to go through this inevitable learning curve, and that's normal. I've always said that Trump is a very quick learner. So he learns very quickly. Just look at what he says next. He says, they are a bunch of asterisk. They are evil and sick people. We must eradicate this kind of cancer. They are cancer. You have to know what to do. You have to remove the cancer as early as possible. That's what he just said. He specifically said, I told them, every time you hit us, we'll hit back. Of course, he said, and they will absolutely do that. They are dirty players. They have killed thousands of our soldiers, and they have also killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people. All right, so Trump really does, I think, have a deep understanding of Iran. But has he fully learned everything? Personally, I don't think he has completely learned it yet. Why? Because today he also said, my goal is not regime change. It's very simple. They cannot have nuclear weapons. When he says this, I think it's actually a very honest statement. He really means it. But the problem is, if you say, my goal is not regime change, in a certain sense, maybe this comparison isn't entirely accurate, but the idea is similar. It's like when Biden told Putin back then. If you say you won't intervene in a small-scale war, okay, then Putin feels emboldened to invade Ukraine. So when Trump says his goal isn't regime change, the leaders of these evil regimes immediately feel at ease, because as long as you don't try to change our regime, we can do whatever we want. We're not afraid of anything. No matter how poor you make our country, it won't affect us at the top. It's really like the saying, the children might suffer, but we won't. It's not we suffer, but the children don't. So this is the hallmark of a dictatorship. So when you decide not to change the regime, and you know that this regime absolutely wants to have nuclear weapons, there's no way you can stop them from getting nuclear weapons. So Iran has nuclear weapons, Trump can't let them have them, right? So what will he do? He'll strike, right? Even if it's a remote strike or a massive military buildup, in the end, Iran will definitely learn to blockade the strait. Once the strait is blockaded, it will force Trump to have to remove this regime. This logic is inevitable. The only question is, how long will it take for people to realize this? So Trump actually can't say that his goal isn't regime change. He has to say, you can't have nuclear weapons. If you insist on having them, then I'll change your regime. Saying it like this, I think, is the only way to have any real impact and make the leaders of these evil regimes in Iran think twice. Of course, in the end, I still don't think it will really solve anything. So everything Iran is doing really is, to put it plainly, they're digging their own grave. They're looking for trouble, and through their actions, they're teaching Trump how to see them for what they are. In the end, how will they end up destroying themselves? Even Iran's attacks on Qatar and Saudi Arabia, like the attacks on Saudi commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and the repeated bombings of Bahrain and Kuwait, all of these will have consequences. The advisor to the president of the UAE, Gargash, said that the Gulf Arab states cannot continue to be caught between Iran escalating conflicts and the path of reason and peace. Repeated indecision. What he means is that we can't keep hesitating forever. At some point, we have to jump into the fray ourselves. So given the current situation, I think Trump already understands about 70 or 80% of Iran, but he might still need to observe and learn for a while longer. Trump actually said something very honest. He said they're from another school and that his whole life has been about making deals. But I've never seen this kind of deal before because they're from another school. In Chinese, we say they're unconventional. They're people from an unconventional group. So unconventional people need to be handled with unconventional methods. All right, so now everyone's question is, will Trump launch a full-scale war against Iran again? I don't necessarily think so. Right now, it's just fighting and stopping and fighting, because the timing isn't right to start a full-scale war. Even though the so-called 250th anniversary U.S. election has passed, the midterm elections are still ahead. So right now, the timing really isn't right. Did you see what happened? Yesterday, there was a strike, and oil prices jumped 7% to 8%. If there's another strike today, oil prices might go up again. That's the current situation, but it's something you can't avoid, unless you just don't care about Iran having nuclear weapons. If you do care, then from here on out, you just have to keep moving forward. And in the end, you'll have to topple the entire Iranian regime. That's the inevitable path. All right, now let's talk about this. Trump is really shaking things up with NATO, giving the NATO leaders a real shock. Trump's style can be summed up in 4 words. He speaks his mind. All right, so Trump was at NATO in Ankara, Turkey, and had a long conversation with NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg right in front of the press. At the same time, he also met with the host, the president of Turkey. What's his name again? Oh man, I always forget his name when I'm talking, right? Anyway, both conversations have now been made public. Well, not just made public, they were actually speaking right in front of the reporters. So a ton of incredibly candid information was revealed. Let me break it down for you in 4 areas. The first area is about NATO. Trump made it clear that NATO doesn't support us in striking Iran, and that the Europeans have let America down. Trump went on to say that he actually doesn't need their support. He just wanted to test them. And sure enough, it turned out that NATO is completely unreliable. He even called him out publicly. Germany, France, and Italy all refused to support us at a critical moment. At that time, Rutte was sitting right next to him, NATO Secretary General Rutte. Trump said that back then, when they made the request, Rutte wasn't there, and that talking to Rutte would have been totally different. Rutte's great. And Rutte is indeed very right now. Trump really agrees with him. So Rutte made it clear, saying, "I believe your actions last night were absolutely necessary." He was referring to last night's strike on Iran, saying it was a very strong response. "On this matter, I'm standing with you." And then he said, "When you come to NATO, your goal is to get all the NATO countries to increase their military spending. To reach 5% of their GDP, this commitment needs to be put into practice. As everyone knows, as soon as Trump came to NATO, Turkey and NATO already announced the launch of large-scale arms deals worth tens of billions of dollars. And then, with the renewed commitment to 5% of NATO's military spending, so it says in there, I have to say, if it weren't for you, if you weren't in this position, none of this would have happened. So this is your victory. This is the claim. The meaning of is there is like, what does it remind me of? Like that Greek hero, you know, when he led the attack on, what was it called? Not Homer, but Troy. Remember that movie? Yeah, when he held up his sword and pointed it at his warriors. Take the victory, it's yours. These are the words that Rutte said to Trump back then. Take this victory, it's yours. Is there any way? All right, and at the same time, from July 7th to 8th, as you can see, NATO leaders now, they really don't look happy at all. They're absolutely not happy, but it's already different from before. In the past, they would get angry. They would try to find a way. But now, basically, they just listen. That's it. Then, on July 8th, at the NATO summit, France and the UK proposed a new multinational maritime security mission. They discussed deploying naval forces, including minesweeping capabilities, to ensure the safety of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Also, they mentioned that this plan is still in the discussion and coordination stage and has not been officially implemented yet. Let me add a comment, okay? They're always discussing things, but what actually comes of it? When the UK gathered 40 countries to discuss this, that was already about 2 or 3 months ago. They're always stuck in discussions. This is exactly the predicament Europe is in right now. They just talk without taking action. They lack the determination to act, and they don't have the ability to follow through anymore. Europe is really getting weaker and weaker, weaker than a single country. The country they were supposed to help has now become the strongest country in Europe, Ukraine. I'll talk more about Ukraine in a bit. Okay, so first, Trump was very blunt about NATO. He basically said they have no loyalty, that they lack loyalty. All right, next, let's talk about Spain. So right now, NATO has agreed to commit 5% of GDP to military spending, but Spain once again said they're not going to do it. So what's the situation with Spain now? Spain is currently, in terms of NATO's military spend, it's been below 2% for a long time, let alone 5%, and they've made it clear that they're just not going to pay it. They're not paying, period. As a result, Trump was furious. Well, not just furious, but at the NATO summit, he was downright blunt with them. He said Spain is a terrible partner for NATO. They neither contribute effort nor money. They think that since they're part of Europe, we absolutely have to protect and defend Spain. So basically, they're just freeloading without paying. I don't want to have anything to do with Spain. Please, just cut them off, he said. What he meant was that Europe should cut off all trade with Spain, including visits and exchanges. In other words, he was basically telling European leaders on the spot, you should kick them out of the EU. Of course, is that even possible? Obviously not, right? But regardless, at least for Trump, the idea that the US should cut off trade with Spain is really being put on the agenda. So what's really going on with Spain? The Spanish Prime Minister is named Pedro Sanchez. He leads a left-wing government, and basically, his policies are pretty much the same as those of the U.S. Democratic Party. Raising the minimum wage, expanding labor benefits, expanding social welfare, promoting gender equality, advancing LGBTQ rights, addressing the housing crisis by promoting affordable housing, and pushing for an energy transition, mainly shifting toward renewable energy. Open immigration, he's all for it. This year, he announced a general amnesty for all undocumented immigrants within Spain. Everyone can obtain legal status. Externally, he has taken a clear and firm stand in solidarity with Palestine, and in 2024, officially recognized the state of Palestine. He has repeatedly and harshly criticized Israel's military actions in Gaza, so in this regard, he really stands out in the Western camp. He's especially unique in how he handles things. That's why Trump has been anything but polite to Spain, publicly embarrassing Spain in front of the whole world. Basically, we're going to cut off trade with you and kick you out. Don't stay in the EU. Also, another example is with Meloni, who was originally an ally. She's the conservative prime minister of Italy. When Trump was talking to Turkey's President Erdogan, yes, Erdogan, he pointed at Erdogan and said, dealing with someone as tough as you. I have no problem dealing with tough people, but dealing with weak people just doesn't work. He didn't mention any names, but he was clearly referring to Meloni. In another instance, he said that Meloni's approval ratings in Italy weren't great, probably because she rejected a country that truly loves and defends Italy, the United States. When it comes to stopping Iran from acquiring and developing nuclear weapons, they take these kinds of actions. But then they add another line and say, well, NATO's all the same anyway. What he means is, honestly, what he's saying is pretty harsh. It's really harsh, but is what he's saying true? Yes, it is. As everyone knows, Italy is in southern Europe, very close to Iran. If NATO countries were to be attacked, the first would be Turkey and the second would be Italy. So you could say that, of course, Greece would count too. In short, what was said is once again blunt but true. So how did Meloni respond? Meloni said, these ongoing baseless attacks are meaningless for me to respond to, and also said, my popularity is none of your business. I suggest you worry more about yourself. But honestly, she's got quite a sharp tongue. But as for Trump, he feels that he just isn't enough of a friend, not enough of a buddy, you know? Like, I treated you so well, but when I needed you, you couldn't do anything for me. Then when we meet up, you act like nothing happened and come take pictures with me again. So Trump really looks down on people he calls two-faced, you know, that kind of thing. And as for why Trump is like this, I'll talk about that in a bit. Actually, Maloney's behavior is a very typical example of how European politicians act and speak. But for Trump, he just can't stand it. I'll talk about why he can't stand it in a bit. Another very important point. Let's get back to Greenland. We all know that at the Davos World Economic Forum, Trump brought his whole entourage, his big team over there. He wanted to secure Greenland, but Denmark responded by saying, that's not going to happen. Greenland won't be given to you. Please respect the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark and accept the reality that Greenland is not for sale. So why is Trump once again saying that the United States wants to control Greenland? What's his reasoning? Today, I'll analyze this for everyone again. So this time, Trump made it clear, saying that the issue of Greenland has already affected our relationship with NATO. This is the main reason harming my relationship with NATO, because Greenland is of no help to Denmark. But Denmark also hasn't actually invested resources to help Greenland, yet it's an important link for the United States. What does he really mean? He says he doesn't want to repeat the story of Ukraine on Greenland. What does that mean? What story about Ukraine? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine signed several peace treaties, but who is actually responsible for Ukraine's defense? Was it the responsibility of the United States or Europe? The responsibility was unclear. So when Russia tore up the agreements, broke the peace treaties, and directly invaded Ukraine, there was no one specifically in charge. So what Trump means is, if I invest in Greenland, send in military forces and resources, I must have sovereignty. You can't have the US military going to visit an island that belongs to another country. So Trump reiterated that the United States should take over Greenland, and if there was any opposition, the US should withdraw all its troops from Europe. Wow, just listen to that. Europe must have been so shocked they could barely catch their breath. All right, now let me share my thoughts. Trump really has his own style and way of speaking when it comes to getting things done. The world, and especially Europe today, needs to get used to it. Why do I say that? Because his style is to speak his mind directly, without any diplomatic language. You know, there's a saying in the West, a diplomat never says no, and a woman never says yes. A diplomat never says no. Otherwise, well, they're not really a diplomat. And the next part of the joke is, a woman never says yes. Otherwise, she's not really a woman. So Trump is, to put it plainly, America's #1 diplomat, right? But because the president's job is to be the top diplomat, when he needs to say yes, he says yes, and when he needs to say no, he says no. The world isn't used to this, because the world has become too hypocritical by now. Of course, I'm not saying women are hypocritical, it's just that it's not easy being a woman, and when they say yes or no, it's just a more reserved way of expressing themselves. What I'm talking about is diplomats. Diplomats, never speak directly. They avoid, delay, hesitate, and are evasive. That's what today's diplomats call political correctness. Their professional way of working is to never say no. But as for Trump, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have the time. He doesn't have the patience. For him, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. All that hemming and hawing, all that nonsense, he just doesn't care for any of it. This is the first point. His style is to speak his mind directly. That's what left everyone stunned at the NATO summit. Basically, he just says what he thinks. That's the second point. If you look at it, Trump actually has a point. Because Greenland, Denmark really never manages it. They neither have the interest nor the ability to take care of it. Keeping Greenland is just about saving face. So the response to Trump was basically, you need to respect me, you need to give me face, this is my sovereignty, right? That's what he meant. But what does Trump see? He sees that nuclear missiles from the Chinese Communist Party and Russia could fly over the Arctic, right over Greenland, heading toward the United States, and even toward Europe. Isn't that a security loophole for NATO? So you want the US to take care of it, right? If you don't want nuclear missiles flying over Greenland, and you want the US to handle it, what are you giving the US in return? Are you giving the US money? Will you? Of course not. So basically, the US is just taking care of it for free. That's why Trump said, no, that era is over. If you want us to take care of it, you have to give us this land. That's called aligning responsibility with authority. If you give it to us, If the Chinese Communist Party or Russia wants to take Greenland or wants to invade or do anything like that, then the responsibility is crystal clear. The US will absolutely defend it. But what is Europe really thinking? Do I think Greenland is that important to Denmark? Honestly, it's not that important. Actually, Europe is worried, what if the US and Europe fall out and become enemies in the future? What happens then? That land would be yours. Right? So actually, this is what Europe is thinking, but they don't dare to say it. On the other hand, Trump is very open about it. Didn't everyone see his attitude? What Trump really means, even though he seems domineering, is that we're all one family. Trump truly believes that Europe and the US are one family. What kind of family? Family of Western civilization. Or you could say the family of Judeo-Christian tradition. That's why he asks for things directly, just like asking a brother for something. He's basically saying, don't make a fuss, just give it to me. So, let me add a bit of news here. The UK Ministry of Defence just announced that they will appoint Lieutenant General Philip of the British Army to take over as the commander of NATO's only Joint Operations Command located in the United States. This command is located in Norfolk, Virginia. Yes, that's where the headquarters is. It's called the NATO Joint Operations Command, and for the first time, a British general will serve as its commander. So what does this appointment mean? What it signifies is a new chapter in NATO's collective defense relationship, because this commander will oversee NATO's operations in the Atlantic, the UK, the High North, and the Nordic regions. The security of the alliance's northern flank and these critical sea lanes will all be entrusted primarily to the US military. But now, the command of NATO forces is being handed over to a British general. Can you see it? The United States is actually very open and straightforward. The US truly treats Europe like family, which is why it reaches out to ask for their help, to ask for that territory. But Europe is full of calculations. They care about saving face, and they're thinking about what to do if we fall out in the future. They have so many concerns, but why don't they talk about them openly? See, you have traditional politicians versus an outsider who's spent his life in business. When these two types have a conversation, it just doesn't work. So, of course, over time, I think Europe will gradually get used to it. After all, it's just like making friends in our daily lives. You might have a friend who speaks really, really bluntly, but when you think about it, what he says actually makes sense. In the end, what happens? You stop minding it, and you might even feel that dealing with him is so straightforward. Things get done so quickly, don't they? What do y'all think? Do you agree with Trump's style of speaking his mind? Maybe a bit rough around the edges, but what he says makes sense. Or do you prefer the European approach, like Maloney's style? What about you? Do you support Trump's style or not? Let's do a quick poll and see what everyone thinks. So Trump really is an outlier, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He's someone who spent his whole life in Manhattan, always building things. A Manhattan businessman who spent his whole life getting things done and building up the city. Now he's become a world leader, and that's brought about all these changes. Okay, so next let's talk about the prospects of the Russia-Ukraine war. Is a turning point coming soon? First, let's mention that Ukraine is currently at NATO, and Zelensky has also gone there. Zelensky really needs one thing, and that's the American Patriot missile. But this missile's very expensive, costing $3 to $4 million each, and even the US doesn't have enough for itself. So what did Zelensky suggest? He asked, could you please give us the technology so we can produce them ourselves? Will Trump agree to this? This news has sparked a lot of discussion. Before we get to the answer, let's first mention that on Wednesday, the Ukrainian military confirmed, on the 8th to be exact, that Ukrainian drones launched a large-scale nighttime attack and successfully bombed 3 major oil refineries inside Russian territory. One of the military airports, that is, a drone airport, also dealt a heavy blow to the Russian fleet on the Sea of Azov, cutting off the Kerch Strait supply line to Crimea. So in this attack on the Sea of Azov, 9 Russian oil tankers responsible for supplying Crimea and the Russian-occupied areas in southern Ukraine were hit. To put it plainly, they were targeting the supply lines. Actually, it's not just the supply lines for the battlefield, they're hitting Crimea's supply lines. So at the same time, the Ukrainian forces launched counterattacks on multiple frontline battlefields in Donetsk and Kharkiv regions, seizing control of some areas while putting pressure on Russian troops. In addition, a drone factory near the front line and a Soviet MiG-35 fighter jet were shot down. So this is the current shift in the Russia-Ukraine battlefield situation. There are 4 major changes. First, Ukraine is getting stronger and stronger in the fight, and now they can produce tens of thousands of drones per day.